Okay, hello YouTubers. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. This is Hanney Seylim one more time, and Adam Elmasri discussing and addressing and contemplating infinity and consciousness, or whichever comes first. Does consciousness comes before infinity? How are you, Adam?
I'm good. Sorry, I do every time I do the same mistake. I leave the YouTube working in the background and I hear the echo. And sorry, I was distracted for a second.
That's okay.
I have my excuse. I'm not infinite, so
Exactly. We can always rely on being infallible. Okay.
interesting enough, we can always rely on being infallible. But when we come to study theology and try to analyze the the greatest being, we seem to get the hang of it and we understand everything about it.
Yes, yes, and you go with this sort of argument. You say your brain is too limited to judge God, but this is the same brain you use to realize God's goodness and greatness and everything else. So how can you trust your brain assessing certain things because it goes with your biases, but then distrust the same brain because it's giving you results that you don't like? So you're either going to trust it or not.
Yep.
Um, okay, so for those who did not see our Arabic episode, I'm not quite sure what kind of viewers we're going to be having today, whether they're completely Arabic speakers or a mix of Arabic and English speakers. But the whole situation was triggered by a certain tweet by one of Adam's followers on his Facebook page that was very sort of profound and very deep that Adam and myself quite liked, and we wanted to sort of discuss it. But before we do that, I'll give Adam the mic for a few minutes to introduce himself to the English-speaking audience around the world. Go for it, Adam.
Thank you, my friend. Okay, so for those who don't know me, my name is Adam Elmasri, an Egyptian YouTuber. If you understand Arabic, you probably have figured out from my name because Al-Masri means Egyptian. um, and I do have my own channel on YouTube where I run my videos around critical thinking, theology, philosophy, and the most important part is sacred text. And let me do sacred this way because I criticize religion in a lot of sense. Um, my background, I came from a Coptic Orthodox Christian family. I was born and raised as a Coptic Orthodox. I have been until very recent in my life practicing, and I was a deacon in the church and everything. Like I lived a normal Christian life, and then I have no idea what happened. All of a sudden, I started this pursuit of truth, and obviously it had its roots in the past. But about 7 years ago, I started my own study, which was in the beginning it was my own study and readings and research, and then I decided to go academic. So I joined one big Australian university to do a bachelor degree in critical thinking. Sorry, not critical thinking, textual criticism. So I do have a bachelor degree in biblical studies and textual criticism. By the end of that course, I came to declare myself agnostic, or how I like to usually put it, spiritually agnostic. So I do entertain the spirituality and the philosophical arguments around the existence of God, but I do not have a belief stand, hence why I would say agnostic. And that's it. That's about me in a nutshell, I guess.
Okay, I've been told that I'm having feedback using the mic, so I am going to try to lose you for a second and add a different type of mic. Um, yeah, if you just give me a second, thank you. Hello. Can you hear me, Adam? Can you hear me, Adam?
Yes, I can clearly. I can hear you now.
Okay, so hopefully this will improve the sound a little bit. And thank you to our viewers who will give us the feedback to tell us how it's going. Somebody's saying Hanney's voice is quite low, so I'll try to increase the volume on my end.
Sigmund Freud, by the way, is the friend who put the comments earlier, and we will come to discuss that later.
Yeah.
Let me just load. Yes, okay. I think we're good to go.
Apologies for this interruption. Okay. I hope the sound is a lot better now. Okay, so my background, very similar to Adam, but in a slightly different way. So I was born in Egypt, and I come from a Muslim background, which is different. A lot of people don't know that Egypt has about, what do you reckon, Adam, about 12% of Egyptians, Christian Coptic?
Oh, Coptic Christians would be much more than that. I would say around 30%.
20, you reckon?
Yeah.
Because on Wikipedia, so you hear sort of conflicting numbers, but I've always thought,
I think it's not openly declared, and there's a lot of statistics, like Muslims converting to Christianity and otherwise. There's a gray area, but I would say between 15 and 20%.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know the word Coptic, what it actually means, and it actually means Egyptian. So at some point, everyone who lived in Egypt was a Coptic, regardless of the religion. Okay, so so a bit of education background as well. Adam, you've got the sort of the critical sort of studies of is it Old Testament or New Testament as well?
Well, it's all biblical studies in general, so Old Testament and New Testament, but most of the subject that I did deliberately was around New Testament. Coming from a Christian faith, my approach towards that study, it wasn't a career-driven study, so it was mainly to learn more about my own faith. So yeah, I was much more focusing on New Testament Christianity.
Right. So I've got multiple education myself. So I'm a linguist because I've graduated from the Faculty of Languages, the ALSEN, German, Spanish, Italian, what have you. And then I went overseas. I've been living outside of Egypt for the last 30 years. Lived in different countries, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and I've had some studies in psychology, philosophy, and I've done my master's degree a few years back. Hopefully my PhD is not for a while. I'll start working on it in the next year or two. But philosophy is my passion. I like to think about things. And if you think about things, you're philosopher. That's what the Greek word actually means. Philosophy is a love for wisdom, of wisdom. And if you think about things and contemplate life and ask the hard questions, then you're a philosopher of some sort.
Sorry to interrupt you, Hanney. Everyone's saying echo is too much. And
Echo, right?
I can't hear echo, but I felt a shift in your...
I'm using the headphones. Maybe I should get rid of the headphones today. What do you reckon? I mean, yesterday wasn't too bad. Maybe if I get rid of them, I'll just give it a go and see.
Okay.
Hold on. Hello, can you hear me?
I can. How about the guys over there?
Okay, you tell us, guys, if this is better for you.
Skeptic, Freud, any feedback about the sound? Oh, well, you're the one who need to talk.
I need to say something. Hello, 1, 2, 3. Can you guys hear me better? Okay, so I'll just continue talking about the the philosophy and the philosophical dilemma that we're about to display in front of our viewers and listeners today. So this is the Arabic. Um, this is the Arabic sort of thoughts of Selim Salah aljahfarry. It was sort of posted this on his own page and shared it with Adam's page. Um, and this is the English translation for those. This is obviously an English episode, so we will continue addressing the points in English. So let's start taking one line at a time, Adam. So, can an infinite have consciousness? Okay, so sounds very simple and in premise, but very loaded. Let's sort of explore this. Go for it, Adam.
Well, as I was talking to our friend Freud earlier, we have to define consciousness before I can say whether an infinite can have consciousness or not. And my definition, I do not claim that this is the definition of consciousness, but the way I perceive the term is that open for input, receiving. So when we say someone is conscious, we are talking about a person who is completely aware about his surroundings, his or her surroundings, and in a state of receiving information. The receptors are on, so you can see, you can smell, you can hear, and now I can say that you're conscious. This is my definition of consciousness away from the scientific or the technical terms, because funny enough, if you go and try to research the meaning of consciousness, you will find different fields of science defining it differently. So if you're looking at consciousness psychologically speaking, will be different from consciousness if you're looking at in neuroscience, for example. So I'm putting it in the lamest sense, and there is a reason why I'm putting it in the simplest form like this, because it will be more obvious later on. But if we're going to talk about God, we're talking about a being that doesn't have a physical brain, doesn't have the physical body, the flesh. So I cannot really go and examine the term in the sense of neural pathways and neuroscience and the psychology of it. We're not talking about a human being, which is one of my biggest objections when we talk about the God topic, is that we project human features on it. So avoiding that altogether, I'm not talking about consciousness in the terms of physical sciences or biological sciences. I'm talking about I'm talking about consciousness in the simplest form, as I said. That's my understanding, but you might have a complete definition of it.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is definitely our colloquial understanding of consciousness. You know, if somebody hits you on the back of the head, you lose consciousness, and you're out. You know, you're back, or you are under anesthesia. You know, going through an operations of some sort, and you can't even remember dreams or anything. It just you're unplugged for a couple of hours, and you come back, and that's it. However, I am going to sort of address different type of consciousness, the one that sort of eluded philosophers and of recent times psychologists and neurologists. So I'll have to go back to sort of the olden days, our connection to the world and how we started to develop of what I think is the consciousness of where you question things, where you start asking. So you no longer being chased by an animal that's trying to kill you, and all what you're trying to do is just survive. Because at that point you have no time to really contemplate life and see where you come from and how to build the perfect city. You're just wanting to survive every day and just to eat and maybe reproduce. That's probably the most fun you'd had at those sort of times. So I don't think the full brain capacity will be sort of geared towards survival, and that's what natural selection has sort of prepped us to do to survive. However, once certain things have taken place, as I said, Homo erectus, one of the hominids in our evolutionary history, the freeing of the hands. Homo erectus means the erect man, the first hominid that sort of stood on 2 feet and freed the hands to be able to start using the hands to do simple labor, weapons, bit of craft, and when they had the time, a bit of art even. And that sort of led the way to Homo habilis, which means the manual or handyman. And this is the start of where things got a bit interesting. Obviously, cooking food is a huge thing. Eating raw food takes a lot of energy and digestion. Once you start cooking food, you can absorb a huge amount of calories and take a lot less time to eat and digest. And imagine those times around the fire. When you start the fire, you start cooking, and you're a bit relaxed because you've got your weapons and you've got a group of people to have your back while you're cooking. Some stories started to evolve. People started looking at the stars in the skies and said, "What is that over there? Why is? How far is that? And why are start asking the questions? Well, what are we doing here?" And I think consciousness at this point started to emerge by asking the first simple questions. I'll leave it at that because I'm going to have to go to the Greek philosophy bit, but I'll let you sort of add anything at this point.
No, I wouldn't add anything at this point. I just want to add I want to say a quick comment. For
Sure.
those who watched the Arabic episode yesterday, I might say things differently today. And the reason for that is that I kept, it's not, this topic is not really a black or white. And you revisit and you might adjust your thoughts around things. So I apologize in advance if I say something that contradicts what I said yesterday. It's not a slip of mind. I might have adjusted my thoughts since yesterday.
That's that's pretty normal, to be honest. It's a difficult situation, and I do the same sometimes as well. All right, so I've just moved a little bit from sort of maybe the emergence of consciousness, the very beginning, the seeds, and I'll move towards maybe I'll jump. It's a huge skip, but you've got the pagan religions and the connections to nature and what's thunder, what's lightning, and who's the god of that and who's the god of this, and then basically nature has become our god, our new god, and you start giving sacrifice and offerings to reduce the wrath of these sort of forces of nature, and probably ask for favors because a bit of rain can help a bit and cool things down. Agriculture hasn't started at this point, so I'm not going to go on and talk about agriculture and what could have happened in simple forms, not natural agriculture, as in plants that sort of grow sort of naturally, and so praying for rain would have not been unheard of at that time, but it was around the forces of nature. And then obviously our understanding of the world around us started to evolve and get a bit more sophisticated. And then we'll start with the Greek era, which is about 500 BCE. That's before Christ, obviously. So we'll start with Socrates. You get the Socratic method. So Socrates was one of the earliest philosophers during the Greek Renaissance, if you wish. Basically, he started his method by admitting that he does not know anything. He said that we need to start as a blank slate, and we need to start asking questions about what is the truth and what is reality. And start going around the city of Athens, where he was born, and asking everybody that he sees on the street questions about things like what is good or what is evil, how do you build a just city, and realize that he was actually the most intelligent of them all, because he was the only one that he was aware that he did not understand much. Everybody had very strong views on life and about life, However, Socrates admitted that he does not know much. That's one of his biggest sayings. He obviously ended up being killed or executed by the Greeks because he was accused of causing mayhem and causing people to rebel against the state. Now, obviously, Plato comes next, but I'll let you add and sort of say anything if you want to add anything at this point.
Nope, I'm very interested in hearing these stories. I'm not
All right.
literate enough about the life of the philosophers and the development of it as much as you are, so I will let you continue on this.
Yeah. Now, funny enough, Socrates never wrote a word of what he ever said. It's all sort of hearsay, and we only know about Socrates' work because of his one of his disciples, Plato. Plato was one of his students, but actually came a bit later. It wasn't in contemporary to Socrates. But Plato is the first person to the connection to consciousness, because Plato is an idealist. There's a school of philosophy called idealism, um, which basically says that all what we see is an illusion. It's actually only a reflection of the perfect world that only is in our mind. The word ideal comes from idea, um, and Plato believed in perfect form. So if you see, for example, the moon that we see is a reflection of the perfect circle that exists in the perfect world. Um, the very famous allegory of the cave of Plato, he contemplates that a few people were inside the cave, and they just had a fire on, and you can only see their shadows in the cave. And they thought this was reality. So they started building myth and stories around the shadows until one of them one day was able to escape the cave and was confronted by the brightness of the sun. And he actually got back to the cave and told people about the ultimate truth that they couldn't see because they were only connected to the illusory world that they are exposed to. He actually ended up being killed by the people inside the cave because it was too much for them to handle. And that was Plato. So Plato was, this is where the word Platonic love comes from, by the way, Plato. So it's utopian. It's everything that has to be perfect. There's a perfect world out there, and the world we live in is only a distortion of the perfect world, which connects them to their consciousness. So that consciousness that's abstract, it sits outside of space-time, is perfect, and we have a distortion of that. And what we try to do is trying to reach that perfection by building the just city. Believe it or not, he was probably one of the first socialists in the world because he did not believe in a family. He said, well, one of the best way to build a just city is to remove families and just you have no decision as well. Everything is communal and everything is public property. And that's the best way to have a just city, because if you have no attachment to the world and to materials, then you have no quarrels. You will focus on trying to perfect yourself. And finally came Aristotle, who is the student of Plato. And now Aristotle, even though he was a student of Plato, he actually was opposing to Plato's views because he was a realist. He was an empiricist. He believed that the real world is what's real. What you see is what you get. If you touch something, it is what's that, and examining the world as it is, it's the best way to reach knowledge and truth. He pretty much established himself to be the first philosopher scientist, because he was very, very keen on examining living being and describing them. So he probably laid the way to very early the scientific method. And I'll leave it at that, Adam, and I'll let you. I don't want to speak all the time, so you please have a word.
A bit of trivia about Socrates. It's not completely related to the topic, but the early church fathers of the Christian church considered Socrates almost Christian. which was very interesting because people admired Socrates and his thoughts, and but obviously Socrates was about, I think, 400 or 450 years before Christ. Um, so he didn't, you can't really call him Christian in the traditional sense, but because of his views on the world and what he called for and what he taught at the time, early church fathers considered him Christian, and they said if he was living at the time of Christ, um, he would have been Christian. And some of them, they would take it even further and say, well, Socrates probably would have gone to heaven. Anyway, that's a bit of trivia, but some people consider Socrates a saint. Back to the idea of reality and forgot the other word. I'm not sure if that really affects our understanding of consciousness. And by the way, Hanney, I'm not sure if you're reading the chat, but while you were talking, I was listening to you, and I continued to read the chat between Freud and Skeptic Edge, and it's very interesting what they're saying. It's very difficult to differentiate between consciousness, orientation, awareness, perception, all these terms, because they're very entangled together. But I still talk about consciousness in the sense of being open, having your receptors on, just being able to receive data, being able to receive information. Whether you use this information for analysis, or you are just watcher, or just for confirmation, or you might not be doing anything with this data at all. Just the fact that you are receiving or capable of receiving, that's what I call consciousness. It's exactly like when you say a person is conscious. I'm not sure if we're going to go back to the post or you want to...
Yeah, we'll go back to the post, but just to address this point here. So the recent philosophers and psychologists and neurologists refer to consciousness as slightly different proposition. They're saying at the moment, consciousness is your subjective self. It's your ability to be who you are and feel the redness of a rose, and see it, and taste the sweetness of an apple, and what's that mean to you personally? That's your subjective experience that nobody can have but you. Only you can. The way you look at red is different than the way I look at red, and this is where the consciousness is sort of is encapsulated. It's in your subjective experience that cannot be replicated or experienced by anybody else.
But now we're talking about consciousness in the human sense, and I'm very cautious of that. I understand that this is the only way to examine consciousness.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, we knew consciousness because we are human beings.
Yes.
But if we're gonna examine universal consciousness, or what we call God's consciousness, you cannot really project human attributes.
Yes. Yeah. So, as you know, I don't know if you know David Chalmers. David Chalmers is an Australian philosopher. He's the one who coined consciousness, the hard problem, some 30 years ago. Even Thomas Hegel, who's a German philosopher, and that was in around 1970, he said, "What is it to be like a bat? How does it feel to be a bat?" So you try to reflect and imagine yourself to be a bat, but you can't help but seeing yourself, imagining that you're a bat. There is no way to imagine you're a bat unless you're a bat. And if you're a bat, you're no longer Adam. You are actually a bat, not Adam thinking that he's a bat. So this is where the subjective experience comes from. It's very difficult. It might be a little bit tricky with us human beings, because I can still a little bit push myself in your shoes. And it can feel, so for example, loss of a friend, loss of a beautiful pet of yours, and I can sort of empathize and sympathize with. I can never really feel the way you feel about things and the way you see things. And that subjective experience is the purest form of consciousness because what you've mentioned before, it's linked to brains and synapses and nervous system, which can be examined. And you can actually, if you can damage parts of the brain and you no longer um, have can recognize familiar faces, or you can remember country names but not vegetable names, which is really strange. There's actually you can have a split spheric brain. There is a person with the two sides of the brains are split, and half of the brain is atheist, and the other half is religious. This is actually true. This is not a joke. You can all fall on Wikipedia. This can happen. That's what schizophrenia is about. You know, you can, but it's all in the brain. But the subjective feelings and what makes you who you are, that is coined by David Chalmers, the Australian philosopher, as the hard problem, because to date there is no explanation for it, and this is why it's been used again as one of those playgrounds for those who wants to say there is a cosmic consciousness that's controlling that. That is your connection to the universal consciousness. That is the purest form. The fact that you can close your eyes and can do all of that and look at yourself and can see yourself outside of yourself. It's like you're projecting and hovering above yourself. That is, and they call it the soul, by the way, in religion. It's not really that sort of consciousness, but if you're going to think abstractly, then it's your super consciousness that connects you to the consciousness, the universal one.
Fair enough. Which will take us back to the main post. Can an infinite have consciousness?
Yeah.
I think there is a possibility. I would say maybe it's a 50-50. But again, if an infinite could possibly have consciousness, um, I wouldn't say that it has the human understanding of consciousness, or the human, sorry, not understanding, the human attributes of consciousness. So not consciousness as in neural pathways and nervous system consciousness. Uh, Language is very tricky. I'm unable to articulate it any better, really.
It's very tricky. It is tricky.
And then, if you don't have anything to add here, I would go to the next part of the post,
Sure.
which would say, and if it had consciousness, would it be aware of its infinity? And this is when it gets tricky. Absolutely. Um, to be aware of infinity is catch 22. It literally is catch 22, because infinity by definition cannot be reached. There is a reason why it's called infinity, because you cannot be aware of its endings. It doesn't have an end. So if you, and that's how the post continues when Selim wrote the post. By the way, Selim is attending. He's on the chat, and he continued to say that, and if the infinite was not aware of its infinity, sorry, as if the infinite is not aware of its infinity, then it wouldn't be infinite, for the infinite would not have a limit to be aware of. So basically, it's highlighting that catch 22. If you have a limit, then sorry, if you can be aware of the ending of your limits, then you're not infinite to start with. And if you okay, I lost it. Now I'll give you the mic.
Okay. Can you hear him?
Sorry, go ahead, because I couldn't see the English post on the screen, so I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. Do you want to see it again? Here it is.
Okay. Where the infinite would not have a limit to be aware of. So basically it's one or the other. It's either it is infinite, or it can be aware. Um, so you cannot say that it is infinite and it's aware of its infinity. So That's what I wanted to say at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it gets really tricky because this is now the areas of the paradoxes of the problem is once you attribute to this deity, superpower, super energy, super consciousness, all the attributes that you can give to a thing to make it magnificent, like the omni, the all omni, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Then you end up with dilemmas like the paradox of the stone. Like can God create a stone too heavy that even him could not lift? Um, you can't be all powerful and all knowing at the same time. It gets tricky. We talked about the fine tuning. If the universe was created based on certain dials and certain values, does it mean that God had to create the universe in those sort of values exactly? Which means that this is the case, then the values supersede the power of God because God is limited to his ability to create a viable universe unless he chooses these exact values. The other thing is objective moral values. Is it good because God says so, or God says so because it's good? If God says so because it's good, then goodness is an absolute, and you don't require God because they are more superior to God. And if it's good because God says so, then ethics and morals are arbitrary. So they don't hold any goodness within themselves, but because they come from an authoritarian source, you just have to oblige. It makes it sort of meaningless. It gets tricky. Those sort of issues are tricky. And that's why I guess you and I are sort of in our position in that sort of agnostic, but not quite sure, which is the situation I'll discuss about atheism and agnosticism and how they are often misunderstood by people in definitions. A lot of people think atheism means we say that there is no God, which is not what atheism is about. That's not what's said, guys. So for the record. Okay, Adam, go for it.
Yeah, well, I'll read a couple of comments here because I like what Freud is saying. Freud is is in the chat, not Sigmund, not the real Sigmund Freud. He said, "Why should we assume infinite? Infinity doesn't exist in nature."
True, it's a mathematical idea.
Do you agree with that? Do you agree that infinity doesn't exist in nature?
So infinity is a mathematical concept, and I don't know if you know about Ramanujan. Ramanujan is an Indian mathematician. There's a movie called The Man Who Knew Infinity. It's that Indian guy who went to the UK and he was not well educated, but he wrote the best books in a span of only about 10 or 15 years because he died suddenly at a young age because of an illness in the UK. But he claimed that he gets his mathematical inspiration from the Hindu gods. And it was fascinating. I mean, fascinating. Apparently, this guy is allegedly wrote in about 15 years what could have been written about mathematics for over 200 years by several people. And he actually wrote up the concept of infinity and explained this in best way to explain it. It was actually existed before that, but he explained it better than anyone else. And infinity is used in equations to solve problems, especially in cosmology and in huge distances and light years. So it's used in mathematics, and we said mathematics is both language and it's an emerging thing. It's a language like the language we speak right now. It's a meme to describe forces that are already sitting there. Yeah.
Both invention and what? اختراع واكتشاف.
Discovery and invention.
Yeah.
Discovery. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Freud continues to say, we strive to look for, strive to look for infinity, yeah, but we shouldn't assume the existence of an illogic concept. And here we disagree, or I disagree, sorry, because I don't see infinity, or I don't see infinity as illogic concept. It's ungraspable concept. It's hard to grasp, but infinity in mathematics, or infinity in its abstract concept, is not illogical. It's actually completely logical. Um, there's nothing illogical about it in mathematics. Just because we cannot grasp it, or because we couldn't find the evidence for it in nature, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, or it's illogical. That's to start with. However, I agree with Freud on where this assumption is coming from. Why did we expect that if there is a God of some sort, and even if I confirm that we're not talking about the Abrahamic God, if there is some sort of energy or universal mind or whatever, however you want to call it, why do we assume that it's infinite? My response to that would be, if such a force or such power or such something exists outside of the physical realm, outside of the Big Bang, doesn't is not bound by
By time,
by time,
space,
by the limitations of space-time reality, then
and
uh, 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 then you would assume it's infinite, because infinity is within the physical realm.
yeah.
Outside is the infinity.
Do you know what, Adam? I completely agree with you. The absence, if there's something exists outside of time, space, and time, it's by definition infinite because time ceases to exist. Therefore, it cannot change, and that's where the God comes across. The Christian God sits outside of space and time, and therefore it cannot change because change is temporal. You change from one state to another only within time because time lapses. But if there is no time, there is no change. You can't age, getting older
Yeah.
when there is no time. You can't change. And if there is no space, then you have no form to speak of. Therefore, so it does make sense. The problem is we don't have an understanding of outside of space-time because everything we know and understand and can examine sits inside space-time. So there is a possibility that there is a God or a deity or superpower that sits outside of those realms controlling us. However, when you add certain elements like the divine hiddenness, why God is hiding away, the problem of evil, the suffering, and bits and pieces, you cannot reconcile the Abrahamic God with that sort of existence. At best, you end up with the impersonal God, the God of Einstein, Spinoza, the Aristotle called it the prime mover. Um, um, which is now mathematically and scientifically we know it's wrong because Aristotle thought that planets and stars to go into orbit, they needed to be pushed, they needed to be touched and being pushed to keep in orbit. However, now we know in a vacuum and in absence of resistance, objects in the universe will never stop moving, and the only thing that stops it from moving is the gravity and gravitational waves and resistance. Otherwise, an item will always rotate and orbit in absence of any resistance. So therefore, you don't need a prime mover. Things move anyway. It's actually the natural state of things is moving, and when they stop, it's because they stop by something rather than moved by something. So you don't need a prime mover. You actually need a prime stopper.
Fair enough. Which if we put it back into the post, that will again taking the agnostic stand. So it's either that exist that that's supreme being or whatever we call God for ease, doesn't exist at all, because technically we don't really need that. Or if it does exist, then back into Selim's post, that means he's either not infinite or not aware. And if we say that something exists outside of the Big Bang and the space-time reality, so we assume that by definition it's infinite, that probably suggests that it is not aware. So if there is something, hypothetically speaking, I'm not saying there is, if something triggered the Big Bang to happen and create this space-time reality, if there is such a paraphysics, I don't want to say metaphysical, if there's something beyond the physics that we know, uh, a force that which we call God, then it definitely is not aware, not in our sense. But I think here is where Selim would add another piece to the puzzle.
Yeah,
Uh,
just
yeah.
yeah, just before you hit there, I've got a sort of a comment from one of my mates actually,
Okay.
Stephen Donna. Hello, Stephen. He's actually saying a couple of really interesting points. I don't believe we have not got enough reach at present to understand all aspects of space-time and the concept of the infinite. He's saying that's said in regards to saying infinite is false. Um, now, I just want to tell Stephen, obviously nobody's saying the infinite is false. We're just saying it's unfalsifiable position, and therefore maybe we should reserve our judgment until we have enough data and information to make a proper assessment. The only problem is the God of the gaps, as you guys know. Whenever there is no answer, we evolved as human species to prefer conspiracy theory than no theory at all. So if I come and tell you this has happened, and you're going to tell me, ask me why, and I'm going to tell you I don't know, you'll be frustrated. You say, oh, no, tell me why. It must be a reason. And then your brain start working sort of over time, and you come up with all these conspiracy theories. You know, could it be aliens, or Loch Ness monster, or Bigfoot? You know, we're very, very good at this sort of thing. We come up with things when there is no answer. Scientific method would tell you then, maybe this is the best position to be, where you say, I don't know now, but I'm working on knowing. And this is probably the best, most honest and honorable position to take when you don't really know.
If we read the last bit of the post, because this is the part that I will change my position since yesterday after I thought about it. So Selim continues to say, and if it was not aware of its infinity, then it wouldn't need consciousness in the first place. Okay, so sorry, I realized that that part I was referring to is in the Arabic, not in the English, which
I can get it.
um, fair enough, but I'm not sure if
Yeah.
audience can read Arabic. But basically, what Selim says later on is that maybe its awareness is actually in its laws, in its nature, not awareness in the human sense. And yesterday I kind of agreed with that, but when I thought about it in the light of what we said so far in this video, I started thinking this doesn't make sense, because any force or any law in the universe doesn't have any receptors, or cannot, or shouldn't, well, doesn't have receptors, doesn't have consciousness. There is no need for the consciousness in order for any force to be aware of its own self. The wind, the earthquake, the whatever force in nature is not aware of itself, and there is no need for it to be aware of itself. So if we are talking about a law or force or energy of some sort beyond the physical realm, before the Big Bang, what is where is this coming from? What is the need for it to be conscious? We've never seen it in reality. We can't even abstract it in a way. So even though I actually agree that this is possible, I actually come to change my position today, and I don't think any energy or law or force could be conscious without the physicality of unless it's physical, it wouldn't be conscious.
That's exactly what was my position yesterday, Adam. I remember we talked about, does a gravitational wave needs to be aware of its power? I mean, there is no need for it to be aware. Well, what's the use of gravitational power to be aware of its power or its infinity? Or it's no use at all. However, contemporary and New Age religionists and psychologists, people like Deepak Chopra, people like Jordan Peterson, will tell you about the Deepak Chopra is now using quantum physics and the spookiness of quantum mechanics and physics, the observer effect, the uncertainty principle, and how the quantum entanglement and two particles in two different areas of the universe can communicate with each other at a distance. The observer effect, where a particle or a subatomic particle will have a superposition rotating clockwise and counterclockwise at the same time, and only when you observe it would it choose to take one direction over the other. And the Schrodinger's cat, both are dead and alive. So because it's spooky and because we don't understand it fully yet, it gives space to the New Age theists to go, oh, maybe God is inside every atom then, because it seems that every atom acting as if it's got consciousness of its own. So what if the building blocks of the universe is something even smaller than a subatom? We call it the consciousness atom. And
they actually call it the God particle. They named it that.
Yeah, and it builds up everything, but we don't know about it yet. But you'll see, it's going to come. It's happening. So they use it. That way, Jordan Peterson does the same thing with his obviously word gymnastics and word salads, where he mixes different things. So one of the funny things about Jordan Peterson, we ask him, do you believe in God? And he goes, it depends what you mean by God. And you try to explain what you mean by God. And he goes, oh, and by the way, and it also depends on what you mean by believe. Yeah, he will welcome you, and you end up with nothing. You end up with an empty sack, because there is that word gymnastics where just nothing you can hold on to. And it becomes very, very slippery, slope sort of conversation where there's nothing is defined, and you leave like, what have we learned today about our existence? Nothing really.
Yeah. And language is tricky. I said that in many ways, and I said one of the biggest objections I have against sacred text is that language, by definition, is a very slippery slope. When you are so there's no way a supreme being, if it can communicate with us, it cannot use language to talk with us. You said this once, you yourself, Hanney, if the supreme being that would communicate with us, it would download something. Download or insert something in your BIOS, so to speak, in your operating system. That would be the communication words.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, old religions, I mean, we have Holy Scripture, the Torah, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, and beyond, and all these, and Joseph Smith, by the way. So a lot of Muslims will tell you, Muhammad is the seal of all prophets. He's the last one. And they're not aware of the Mormon movement. It's a religion, a full religion of maybe 200 million people around the world, and they're pretty much around Utah in the U.S., where somebody upstate New York in the United States in the 18th century, Joseph Smith, claimed he was a convicted felon. He was a criminal. He was a racketeering con, and he's gone to jail. And he liked polygamy. He liked to take many wives. He claimed that golden tablets. He dug up golden tablets from upstate New York, and they were written in hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and in gold script. And there was an angel by the name of Maronai that appeared to him and revealed the tablets to him. And he was supposed to be the seal. That's why they called the church the Church of Latter Saints. That's the Mormon Church. So, and that's a full religion. Just in recent times started. I mean, Scientology, it's just only 15 years ago. And that's started from science fiction writer.
Baha'i faith is kind of the same thing. They believe that Baha'u'llah is the last of the prophets. I think this phenomenon happened many times, and Baha'i faith is they claim to be one of the largest growing religions of this age. Everyone can speak shit, really, but
Yeah.
Going back to something you said earlier when you were talking about quantum physics and the particles, and it remains in two states until the observer observe, and then it chooses to choose one state over the other, which is something the New Age spirituality uses a lot. So this is the trick of the language. When you say it chooses, who said that it chose anything? You can say that it's affected by the observer, and by the influence of the observer, maybe it gets into one state or the other. But when you say chooses, that implies consciousness. It implies free will, making choices, all these things. When really in the abstract concept, that's all BS. Even if everything, yes, there is the God particle, and there is the dual states, and there is the observer. All that doesn't mean consciousness exists. So we jump to the God of the gaps.
Exactly.
Make this, these claims.
Yeah. Once it's explained through natural ways, it becomes no longer supernatural. And that's what happens. Supernatural is what we can't explain right now. But once you understand it, it's no longer supernatural. It's finished. It's done. You don't need anything anymore. And just every time a supernatural claim. That's why James Randi, organization, there's still $1 million prize for if you come up with something that supernatural. You will get that money right now. It's still been up for a challenge for a number of years. And nobody's never once, a claim of the supernatural has been proved. The appearance of Mary in Al Zaytun church in the 60s and around Abdel Nasser times, the Weeping Mary, the Bleeding Christ on the cross, the Mother Teresa, basically adopted saint by the Catholic Church and the Vatican just a few years ago, because you can become a saint now after you have to die first. And 2 miracles have to be performed during your life or after your life. So one of the claims was somebody who had a stomach cancer in India held a picture of Mother Teresa, and somebody's got their hands on her stomach, and the cancer was healed. And that was a miracle, and she was made a saint then. Obviously, Christopher Hitchens have a lot to say about Mother Teresa and how she was a friend of poverty, not the poor, and she liked suffering, and she was actually quite an evil woman. But that's the conversation for a different type of episode.
Such a controversy. And we're sorry, say again.
No, I was just thinking. Now we're about an hour into the conversation, and it looks like it's following the same pattern as yesterday. Should we start opening up the conversation to the chat and actually start addressing people? What do you reckon, Adam?
We can do this. However, it seems like we've been doing it anyway throughout the video. We've been reading and trying to address maybe not every single post by these guys, But if there is perhaps if there is any particular question someone wants to ask, because I think reading the comments of mainly Freud and Skeptic Edge, because they're the most active guys in the chat at the moment, I think we agree. They agree with our views. We agree with them. I don't think we are in conflict. Maybe we use some different terminology sometimes, but that's about it. If there is any particular question you guys would like to throw at us or at me or Hanney, we're happy to.
Well, the very last question by Skeptic Edge, the Abrahamic God does not need consciousness or power. As I said, there is a holy script running the universe and cannot be changed. So it's almost like a computer program. It's script running in the background. It's like the Matrix world. It's like the movie, and it's a possibility. There could be a superscript and all the laws of nature. But cosmologists are looking into that. It's said that after the Big Bang, within 10th of the power of 12, I believe, which is 1/10 of a million second of the Big Bang, the rapid expansion of the universe started to happen, and the nature, the laws of nature emerged, because you need gravity to keep things together. You need all the sort of the natural laws pretty much emerged from that point. It might have been refined a little bit, like entropy. So entropy is a concept of things going from a state of disorder, order to disorder. That's why there's an increasing entropy in the world. And that's why, boys and girls, you can never, if you love science fiction, there is no way for you to travel back in time. You can only travel forward in time because of the entropy principle. It's impossible for you to travel back in time. It's like you can break an egg, but you cannot unbreak an egg. So that's why there is a possibility to travel into the future, but not into the past, because of that principle.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
This is where it goes beyond me. I'm not gonna claim that I cannot even grasp or comment on that.
I'm hoping that these sort of series will trigger those sort of conversations and get people to read. And by the way, this is a big thing that we want to say here. I'm sure Annie would agree with me. Whatever we say here, please look it up after we finish talking, because we could be wrong. Please correct us. But we want to show you that you research for yourself. We get information from reading. We could be under misapprehension. We could misunderstood the situation. Please feel free to always examine what's been told to you. Don't take it at a face value, even if you like us so much. So forget about your biases and just go after the truth, not the people, or forget about who you like or who you dislike. Even can get the truth from somebody you dislike. Don't let your biases control your thoughts.
Amen. I agree to that completely and fully.
Is there any other questions in there?
I don't think so. The guys went to sleep, I guess. I'm not sure about the time difference between us and them, but I was gonna say this. Stephen said something. On the basis of there is no external influences from a god or omnipotent being, what could have triggered the Big Bang and what was prior to the Big Bang?
Have a go at it first, Adam, and I'll talk after you.
Not at 11 o'clock night.
I'll have a go at this. So nobody understands what happens before the Big Bang. If you have read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, the book, or you've watched that documentary, it will tell you it's impossible for us to know what happened before the Big Bang, for a very simple reason. The word before, it's temporal, means it's time connected. There was no time before the Big Bang. Therefore, the word before has no meaning. it doesn't mean anything.
Invalid. Yeah.
There is no, it collapses. There are no laws of physics to speak of, and therefore nobody knows. What we can come up with is just mere speculations. It cannot be tested. The speculations are as follows. Obviously, the Big Bang theory happened because it started by Edward Hubble, the discovery of the mega telescope, and this is when we realized that there was a redshift, that the expansion of the universe, it was thought that the expansion of the universe was going to slow down at some point. But the Edward Hubble discovered that the expansion of the universe is actually accelerating, is speeding up, which means all the galaxies are drifting away from each other. And while it's doing that, it's actually creating the canvas of time-space. So it's expanding into nothingness to create more time-space, which is incredibly crazy. That's why our planet, our universe, is not going to die a heat death. It's going to die a temperature death, but being cold, because the sun will explode and we're going to be cold. We will freeze over rather than burn and die. What's been talked about, and there are a couple of theories that are very getting some traction. The M theory, or the string theory, that talks about the Big Bang isn't actually at the beginning. It was just a series of explosions of multiverse. So you know how stars explode to create the heavy elements of what created the Earth, the planets to start with? It's also been contemplated that universes explode. Once they reach a certain age, they can explode and then they can give birth to a new universe. That's one theory, which is the Big Bang. So we are the baby of an older universe that gave rise to us. That's one theory. And the other theory is the bubble universe, that we are in a huge, when you see a bubble and you've got lots of pockets of bubbles, and we are in a universe, in a multiverse situation where a lot of universes exist at the same time, but we are, that's why I call it string theory. There are 11 dimensions, not 4 that we know of at the moment. So the 3 that we are 3D beings, we see things in 3D. However, the 4th element is the space-time, which is we live in it. So a 5D being would be a god to us, because it can perceive more than what we do. So the 11 dimensions that it's been talking about in the string theory talks about the different dimensions of how these universes are separated by these sort of dividers, but you cannot see, because you cannot see beyond your 3D vision. You cannot conceive of. But in a multiverse situation, then especially if it's an infinite universes, basically in an infinite universe scenario, anything that can happen is happening, because it's infinite. So there is versions of us where I've got long hair, basically, somewhere. So it's possible that's speculations. You cannot falsify it, and you cannot test it. Yeah. So to me, I will not call this a theory. To be honest with you, I'll call it a hypothesis at this point. To me, it's not a theory until it's completely tested and improved.
Thank you, Freud, for saying that comment. He said, "I love those kind of discussions. You should never stop. You guys are great. You're awesome." Unfortunately, I'm falling apart.
No, that's all right. I think it's pretty heavy, yeah.
And the thing is, it's not like I want to finish the video, but I know that I'm incapable of going any further. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to engage anymore, especially in such a heavy and deep kind of topics.
Yeah. I was probably with Sigmund Freud has talked about the cyclic universe. That's the one we were referring to. One universe giving birth to another in cycles, like cyclic. It's a cycle of universes, and that's a possibility. Again, it's a different. It cannot be unfalsified, and it's difficult to test for right now. We might remember we talked about yesterday. We are the only being that creates extension to its sensors. We Hubble telescope can see billion light years into the future. You know the stars. When you look at the night sky and you see the stars, and you look at how beautiful the stars are, most of these twinkling stars are actually dead because you see the light that is taken billions of years to reach you, and these stars would have died by now, but because it's taken that much time for the light of the stars to reach you, you only see the stars as you see them now, but they actually have died probably a few million years ago. So it gets your mind around that. It's crazy. It's insane. You know.
So maybe the Hubble telescope is conscious. No, that's a smarty pants comment. Um, so, all right.
All right, guys. So, in view, I think we sort of covered as many questions as possible. We're gonna love you and leave you guys. Adam, I think you enjoy hopefully these sort of conversations and hopefully pick some more topics to talk about in the next few weeks.
I love it. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, wonderful people.
Thank you, guys.